Our problem is take the bank or split right now. Do not go home, do not pack, nothing. 30 seconds flat from now, we are gone on our separate ways. That's it.
I grew up very much inner city in Chicago, kind of late 50s, very early 60s. Been an immigrant family in a neighborhood that had immigrants from southern Italy and from Eastern Europe, and making their way, kind of coming from what Al Pacino called the lower mids, the lower middle class, that upper working class, lower middle class, kind of breaking into the American system, as they could. So it's less about a fascination than it is about an environment. You knew that this cigar store, had a card room in the back. There's names in the newspapers. It's very, very much a Chicago thing in the sense that front page came out of Chicago, came out of that sensibility. Mike Royko's column, writing about this famous family of thieves who were kind of tragicomic, the Pansco family, the three brothers and a sister, So it became it's kind of the lore of the city, as it were. So in terms of knowing about it, it was in the air. It was just part of life on the streets.
Michael and I had a mutual friend in Chicago whose name was Nate Grossman. He said that he had a friend of his who wanted to do law enforcement, police genre stuff. And here I'm a cop wanting to be a writer, and Nate thought, wow, I got to put these two guys together.
Chuck and I became very close friends, and Chuck was a detective in Chicago in a major crime unit. Every city has one major crime unit. In L.A., it's the Robbery Homicide Division. In Chicago, it was the CIU. And then through Chuck particularly, started hearing his encounter with the real Neil McCauley.
Neil McCauley was 49 years old the day we met, and he had already served 25 years in the penitentiary. Of that 25, 8 of it was on Alcatraz, and 4 years on Alcatraz in isolation, what they called the hole. The conversation took place almost 40 years ago now. Knowing his background as I did, I'm not going to rehabilitate this man, okay? And I know that going in. So I said to Neil, why don't you go somewhere else and cause trouble? And he said, I like Chicago. It was just real simple stuff. So I said to Neil, you realize that one day you're going to be taking down a score and I'm going to be there. Then he said, well, look at the other side of the coin. I might have to eliminate you. And I remember the very last thing I said to him was, I'm sure we'll meet again. I just said to myself, I wonder where this is going to lead us.
Chuck had cut into the crew, knew the crew was going to do a burglary of a department store. And when Neil McCauley went in, there was one thing that was out of place. He had scoped out the score ahead of time, and he knew everything that was supposed to be there in terms of vehicles and parking lots and everything else. And Neil McCauley didn't know what was wrong, but he knew something was wrong.
I had 2 detectives on the inside of the store. And once you get into a place like that, you can't move around. It's discipline like you've never known, believe me. And it was later that night, it was maybe 5 or 6 hours later, and we had men all around on the outside. And we get a call on the walkie-talkie that the crew's here. So this is going to go down, And of course, you're inside, and you know now that here comes this moment that you've dreaded for so long in so far that you realize that maybe if things don't go absolutely right, you can get hurt or, God forbid, killed. They moved in to the downstairs area, which there was a little basement area in the back of this store, and they just sat there for maybe 5 or 10 minutes listening to see if there's any movement. To this day, I'll never understand what it was that possessed the detective to get up and walk to the washroom, because he couldn't stand sitting in this one position anymore. And the man had to go. And I had told these 2 guys, you got to go, you go in your pants or you bring a cup, but you don't get up and you don't move. And when this guy got up and walked across the floor, that's all Neil had to hear. Goodbye. They boogied, and that was it. That was the end of it. So now the really damaging thing is, now he knew someone was on him. And prior to that, they didn't know anyone was on them.
Well, that kind of self-discipline, that kind of real professionalism, Chuck admired. And he would say, look how great this guy, look how cool this guy is to figure this out, look how smart he is to have seen that and pull back and never go back, even though Neil McCauley had invested $30,000, $40,000 in setting up the score. He was walked away from the score and was never going to go back, was never going to take it, because it was a risk versus reward equation. And because one thing was out of place, the risk component just skyrocketed.
I think sometimes in the course of events, police officers can see a particular individual that they've been chasing, they've been working on, perhaps as a wily, clever opponent that in some ways mirrors their own self-image.
If Chuck was a thief, what struck me was Chuck's sociopathic perspective about it. It's not sociopathic in Chuck's, but if Chuck had been a thief, it would have been sociopathic. What struck me about it was the duality. And that's not what one encounters in fiction. That Chuck had tremendous regard for this guy, had a lot of respect for him, was fascinated by him intellectually, thought the guy was terrific.
If I didn't know who he was and know as much about him as I did, then, I would have probably thought that, he's probably a halfway decent guy.
In fiction, you would think, well, that means that there's a rapport, that maybe he'll cut him some slack. And that wasn't the case at all. Not even one iota of it. Not even a hesitation. Chuck would hesitate not 1 second, dropping a hammer and killing Neil McCauley, which he did subsequently in 1964.
There's a supermarket at 47th and Cicero. It was a day that they did their check cashing. So the armored car dropped off a lot of cash. We had tailed Neil McCauley's crew endlessly. And then the next thing you knew, they drove into the parking lot, and 3 of them came out of the car and went in. In the windows of this supermarket, they had all these advertisements. We could still see all the people that put their hands in the air and what have you, so we knew that it was going down at that time. And then we didn't try to go in. There were too many people inside. It would have been awful. As they came out the door, they spotted my partner and I coming across the street with guns in our hands, and they opened fire at us. But then it was a foot chase, and we got them individually in between gangways of homes, was where we finished them.
And thus the end of Neil McCauley, a largely forgotten figure until Michael Mann resurrected him in this movie.
I didn't mean to be rude. I didn't recognize you. I work in metals. I'm a salesman. My name's Neil.
It was fortuitous that I met Chuck Adamson, who then introduced me to John Santucci and a number of other, and a whole network of people. And I always took these people in one way or another. If they could act, I had them act in these things. So Bill Brown, who was one of the thieves who stole the Marlboro Diamond out of London, has a big speaking part in Thief, and Chuck had a speaking part. And one of Chuck's partners, Dennis Farina, who at the time was still a detective in the Chicago Police Department, had a role in it.
Charlie Adamson called me from Las Vegas and told us that Michael Mann was going to come to Chicago and that he wanted to meet with us, and he wanted some technical advice in preparation for the movie. So myself and some other guys, we took him around and introduced him to some people. Charlie more so than anybody else.
I started him out from the police side of things. And then he would ask me questions in terms of the relationship between professional thieves and cops. And he came out with this very clear, distinct picture of who's who.
He knew these people. He knew the criminals and he knew the cops. He knew them. And he loved them both. And you could feel it in him. There's real respect, oddly enough, for both sides of the law in Michael.
And I think he was more interested in the personal life and how the job was the wedge, that eventually deteriorated the relationship and it broke up. So he was very interested in that.
Being a police officer is going to change somebody. It's going to change their personality, the way they interact with people after they've been a police officer for some time because of what they see. They just see nothing but, for the most part, the bad side of human nature.
I described the job as many times your eyes were forced to see more than your soul could take.
How else do you do this type of work unless you find it that it rejuvenates you in some way, because it's too dark a profession.
It's a very sexy, alluring thing, you know, and you can get caught up in it because it becomes a challenge. You know, you say to yourself, I'm not going to let this person get away with that if I have anything to do with it. And that's what starts eating away at relationships, where you start thinking, well, I'd rather go follow this guy to find out what happens than to meet my wife at 8 o'clock for dinner. So you sacrifice one for the other. And oftentimes you justify it by saying this is a bad guy, and if I get him off the street, I can help somebody. But a lot of people don't understand that.
Then you have the policeman who deals with this stuff day in and day out and gets so far into the criminal mentality, and that becomes their milieu, that sometimes they become almost indistinguishable.
You know, there's always a thing about, they always say about cops sometimes that on the other side takes one to know one. There's a certain element of, you know, a cop that understands the criminal mentality in order to be able to even deal with them, you know, so it's like another side of the coin.
You've heard the expression, the line is very thin, you know. And it probably is, in the sense that you have to think like a thief to catch a thief.
It's an adrenaline rush. Police officers often talk about it. You suddenly feel like Superman. You feel invincible. You feel that nothing is going to stop you from moving ahead with what you're doing. The adrenaline rush works on both sides of the great divide between law and order and criminality.
Crime is as possible as anything you could imagine, and meeting some of the guys that really do this, it was pretty exciting.
It used to be years ago when I was coming up, people who wanted to be thieves, they learned how to be a thief. They learned how to do things slick. They learned how to deal from the bottom of the deck. They learned how to go through the roof of a building with a drill and bit and a circular saw. They learned how to punch, peel, and burn open safes.
There was a creative aspect to these guys, and they're very interesting guys. Bright, very charming. There's a certain moral code that they carry that's quite interesting and respectable in many ways. But of course, they're criminals.
Everything's about making that big score. So you don't have to work for the man, you don't have to go back to prison. You're gonna make this one big score, get this nice big chunk of money, and retire to an island somewhere.
It's the doing of it is the juice. It's like playing, I played football. It's like, knocking some guy's brains out when he's coming across the middle is the juice, Winning is fun too, but you want to knock that guy's ass, and you want him to know that, come over here again, I'm going to try and kill you. We're playing football, baby. This isn't, it's real.
It's someplace that has a value. The criminal, it provides everything. It provides wealth, it provides comradeship, it provides status. It fills in all the things on the other side that you should get through society on a very petty level, usually. Actually, the kind of gang that he had in Heat, sometimes there's no mob like that operating in the United States, and at the most there's one or two. It's here many of those scores, those big scores like that. Because if you've got enough money to take off that kind of a score, to set it up, you don't need to steal, you know what I mean?
Everybody who's a professional criminal knows they're going to jail or going back to jail. You're going to the joint. So you have peace of mind then. You know where you're at. And if you die, good. I'm tired of this way of living, this angst. Or I had a good run. These guys know they're alive, and they're crazy.
I can only imagine when you get out, you say, you know what, I'm never going back in. All right, I'm going to straighten out my life, and I'm just going to move forward. The realization is, when you get out, nobody wants you to go straight. Nobody wants to give you a break. You're an ex-con.
What is this? Where do you think you're going?
So these stories that I heard and became kind of apocryphal and rich, I have always found when you find those rare events, I find them more dynamic and more exciting than what one can make up. Those are very fascinating people.
When these guys walk out the door of whatever score they're going to take next, next. They're gonna have the surprise of a lifetime.
Heat reminded me of a Greek tragedy. It had so many legs, so many threads, and then it all began to pull in together.
These are morality tales, in a sense. You know, I think they are morality tales, and it's ways of examining the human personality and their weaknesses. You know,
Heat, in my opinion, is the culmination of about 20 years of research on Michael's part.
You went to Michael Mann's world, and you felt it was, no matter where we were in location, there he was, and it was his world.
Heat is like watching reality. It's like watching the 6 o'clock news, only amped up 100%.
A premise for me, or that I had, is about the whole of the film, and that goes all the way back to the writing, which was that just as each person is a universe unto himself, everybody has a life. We tend to two-dimensionalize antagonists in a motion picture. To me, they're much more fascinating if I and the actors and everybody else have the ability to imagine and expand and inflate that into the dimensionality of a life. So that was the idea in Heat. You know, when you do what I do, this is what gets you going.
This crew is good. You know what they're looking at?
What?
Us. The LAPD, the police department. We just got made.
First time I decided to write it, I was writing television, and I hadn't even directed Jericho Mile yet, so the chance of me directing this was remote. But it was one of those stories that I felt was such a complex fabric that it would have to really be compressed, particularly thematically. Like, what's the movie about? What's it really about? I took about 40% of the script and decided to do it as a television movie, just to work with the material, because I was drawn to it. So I wound up doing LA Takedown.
It was shot originally, you know, as a pilot possibility of being a television show. The story certainly generally the same, but there's so many other pieces that, you know, you didn't have in LA Takedown that were in Heat that made it a complete film.
If it had gone to television series, it would have been interesting. You know, that would have been a nice use of the material. But I'd always planned to make a large motion picture out of it. And it was kind of a prototype, because it was a television shooting sketch. I think I shot it in 17, 18 days, so it was kind of a sketch. And then after that, about 2-3 years after that, I was having breakfast with my friend Art Linson, and the subject came up. I said, well, man, you ought to read the whole screenplay. You know, so I gave him the screenplay. And it was absolutely Art who said to me, you're crazy. You should do this as a feature film right now. This should be your next film. And that was absolutely Art's encouragement that caused me to do it.
I read the script and I went, oh, fantastic, you know, perfect. Bob De Niro for this villain, fantastic. And at the time, I said, I think we can get Bob to do this.
Art went after Bob, I went after Al. Those were our first two choices about who should play these parts. Both guys said yes, and that was it, you know. And then I had, what was nice about it is that it had not been developed anywhere, and I owned my own material. So I had a screenplay, and we had a director, and we had a producer, and we had Bob and Al.
I remember Michael showing me this relatively classic story of a pursuit. I remember thinking when I read it that I thought the part that was right for me was the cop. And so I was happy that he wanted me to play the cop.
The style of Vincent Hanna is an Al Pacino style, you know. It's more Baroque. The way he works witnesses, the way he works informants, the way he'll disorient the informant he's with, and making sure that the informant is never on terra firma. When Hanna's working with Ricky Harris, he keeps this guy completely off balance on whether he's going to break into song or berate him or why he wasn't there. And that style, that's Al Pacino.
I thought that I would need to be a little bit more hyper than Robert's character.
Give me all you got! Vincent, give me all you got! I swear, man, my brother Richard's gonna talk to you.
I heard Richard?
We came up with the idea that my character chipped cocaine. We sort of formulated the character to be that kind of person so that every once in a while he would explode, you know. And it's a good thing to know that. It's not in the picture, but that's part of what motivated him from time to time. He was a little high.
I ain't your cuz, you rat motherfucker. And you know because I say so. After I hear what the fuck you gotta tell me.
Look here, man. You understand what I'm saying? I'd get killed for telling you this shit.
Kill walking your doggy.
I went out on a limb with that character, can sometimes go a little bit histrionic, a little bit too far. But Michael encouraged it and understood it in relation to the kind of movie we were making and the yin and yang of what Robert was doing, what I was doing.
In most of these situations, it's easier to portray the thieves and the criminals than it is Hannah. And for a long time, I didn't really have Hannah as an equally complex character who had his own dynamic.
It's the journey, not the destination with Hannah. The journey. He's a hunter. And once he gets a scent of his prey, it sort of self-motivates him and it perpetuates him.
Hannah is addicted to this process. This is an elevated state of being an avid hunter and pursuing this, putting together the pieces, sifting through the minutia, the leavings of a crime scene and putting together what had happened and tracking the people down and getting them and prosecuting them. I mean, that is the elevated experience of this guy's life, and it is a high like no other, and that's what he is turned on by, and that's what he's going to do, and he knows he's going to forego anything and everything else to continue to doing that.
I think he found solace in that world, a certain peace there. As strange as it was, as scary as that world is, he was happiest there. He felt at home there.
Is one thing. When he destroys a lot of the relationships in his life because of it, that's something else. When he is completely and totally conscious as a human being and honest with himself and understands that, all I am is what I'm going after. And that it's not the woman's fault. It's not the situation's fault. It's not unfortunate. Fortune didn't enter into it. He caused these things to happen, and he'll cause them to happen again.
You search for signs of passing, for the scent of your prey, and then you hunt them down. That's the only thing you're committed to.
Life is not an either-or set of binaries. That's something that we compress real life into fiction and make it be that way because it's convenient and mechanically symmetrical. Life's not like that, and that's what excites me, when the power of a character like Hannah to hold seeming dualities in suspense, both at 100%. One doesn't compromise the other. His appreciation for Neil McCauley doesn't compromise one iota. His avidity as a hunter to take down Neil McCauley. Both coexist.
We're sitting here, you and I, like a couple of regular fellas. You do what you do, I do what I gotta do. And now that we've been face to face, if I'm there and I gotta put you away, I won't like it. But I'll tell you, if it's between you and some poor bastard whose wife you're gonna turn into a widow, brother, you are going down.
Art Linson gave me the script and said, read this, I think you'll find it interesting, and I just liked it. I came in first in terms of I committed to the project, and it was Al. And if it had been reversed and he said he was doing Neil, I know I would have gone in on it. But I mean, the one scene like the one that Al and I have is a terrifically written scene. I said, it'll be fun to work on this one.
The fusion of Robert De Niro and Neil McCauley is so total. I can't imagine pulling those two identities apart and telling you why Bobby was right for it. He's committed to the rigidity of that, perspective. And it's a heartbreaking role. It's a tragic, tragic character. What was interesting to me and what's important is that he's autodidactic, he's self-taught, and he elected to have this rigid perspective. Because it's rigid, if he deviates from it, then the repercussions are rigid. And the reason for that is completely practical. It's no other reason, and that is because whatever you're attached to will make you deviate from the most efficient, practical actions.
All I know is there's no point in me going anywhere anymore. I'm just gonna be alone without you. Edie.
In his world, what he's doing, he feels justified in doing it. And the old thing with, with actors, acting is you always have to like your character, more or less. You have to justify what they're doing and feel that it's possible that they could do this, otherwise there's no point in doing it.
You know, I see who he is when all the, that robbery goes awry, and then I try to escape from him. And then that scene where he's kneeling, and I think for his character to kneel in front of a woman, that's where the hope was, but you don't escape, you just don't escape.
Well, she's important to Neil because Neil wasn't, he's doing everything by the book, and life doesn't work that way, Neil goes with this program that he has for himself, and he gets sidetracked by something that he never expected, which is usually when those things happen, I guess.
The thing that was great about the idea of Bob doing this is he creates a character you start to root for even in his badness. That's a very hard thing to do. Very few actors can do it. By the end of the movie, you almost want him to live instead of Al Pacino. It's part writing, it's part what Michael did, but it's considerably part of what Bob did.
Characters are defined by behavior, not necessarily what they say, but what they do. And once Michael directs you into the inner workings of De Niro's character and you understand him and you see him grow and evolve where he can't walk away, which has been his life philosophy, he falls in love. You pull for him because there's love right there dangling, but he turns and he goes back. And you just go, oh my God. But Michael gets you so involved in the character's inner workings because he knows every single layer of every character that's on screen.
Michael's interested in the moment, that moment when what you decide will impact your life forever. You will be a different person. If you do this, you will forever be diminished. Or if you do that, you will maintain your integrity and dignity as a human being.
It's not so much good and evil, but the gray areas that exist where you don't know necessarily whether it's good or evil. It's just a choice.
The thing that struck me that was so special about what Michael had achieved there, and I know in his case it's intentional, is he made no judgment about who was good and who was bad. He just let you see what is. And so suddenly you realize that the cop's personal life is as truly fucked up as the robber's personal life. And that both of them, in as many ways, have to deal with the exact same issues and deal with them with the same integrity or the same lack of integrity as the other. And so the thing that makes the movie so special is that it's not this one-dimensional thing about a chase of the good guy against the bad guy. It's very complicated. You get lost into who's on which side. The fact that he was able to write something so special to kind of merge the two worlds, like without making any judgment that one's better than the other, it just is. That's, I think, the genius of the piece.
One of the things that interested me a lot in building the characters that are inside the film was to individualize every part, including small parts. So therefore, I wanted as much polarization in the casting of every single part. So you felt that every single person was, as in fact each person is, a total individual, a universe in and unto themselves.
Waingro, where is he? Where is he?
How the hell would I know?
Michael's strengths are the fact that in this particular adaptation of his own material, it had depth to the characters. And it's the depth that makes it a classic, not the precise, brilliant shooting and the quote style. I'm not saying style's not part of it, but it's certainly, in my place, is in second position to the content. And I think the content comes from the writing, and the content comes from the performances.
Every aspect of the story, no matter how seemingly small,
had to be really authentic, which meant that the actors portraying those aspects of the story had to be authentically really incredible actors.
The casting process didn't finish. He was shooting the movie and we were still casting. As a matter of fact, it went on for a long time, in a good way, because we get some very interesting characters.
I didn't know if I wanted to do it right away, and I talked to Michael. I said, Michael, you know, this character is very specific, and I think there are guys walking around that you could get to be very authentic for this character. He said, yeah, but John, you know, then we wouldn't get a chance to work together. That was such a nice compliment to me, you know, that he wanted to work with me. And with that said, I said I'd throw in and do it with him, you know.
I read the script, and I didn't like it. And then a week later, they said, well, Michael really wants to meet you anyway. So I went in and I met him, and he said, I hear you don't like my script. And I said, yeah, I don't like it. And he said, why don't you like it? And I said, because the people are despicable, and there's too much blood, and there's no morality, and I don't want to be part of it. And he said at that moment he knew that I had to play Edie, because she is the only one in the movie saying, who are you people?
Michael knows exactly what he wants, which is really great to have if you're acting. His attention to detail and his involvement with every aspect of it is very strong, and you can feel him in every part of the film, which is basically what his job is. I mean, that's your job when you make a movie, is to have people feel what you're feeling.
And there are many things that actors usually have to concern themselves with that really aren't their job, but they're just things in order to create a whole character, and he's just thoroughly involved in every single aspect. He takes the time, he works out the film experience so that it's ideal.
Working for Michael Mann is like taking that nice, slow backswing and just following through. He would always just say, look, just be yourself. Don't put anything on it. Just be. And that was a great lesson for me, because you always want to be more demonstrative. You have this idea of who this character is, so you're going to bring in all this stuff. And the characters are just so rich. I mean, it was like a great action-adventure chess match.
On one level, you're dealing with a crime saga, but also on the other, you deal with the interpersonal relationships that are woven through the entire picture.
This was a huge opera, and we all played our parts, and my part was, you know, the hope that De Niro's character could have of escape and love and forgiveness. There's something so sad about it, so poignant. You know, these people are so lost and they want to be found so badly.
What you hanging with me for, Lillian?
Because I'm proud of you.
You proud of me? What the hell you proud of me for?
There was a sense of drive to a certain point, move into the inner lives of these people, explore that in a very formal structure. Everything has changed, their circumstances all change, and then that results in resuming the crime story drive and police story drive. The small idea of the film is that fortune does not really enter into it. People say, well, unfortunately this happened, or fortuitously that happened. Well, that's bullshit. There is not much fortune in what happens. I mean, if it enters into it, but it's a minor player in what happens in our lives. Most of what happens in our lives is what we have cause to have happen. And sometimes it's impossible to undo the interlacing strings of causality. It needs some kind of cosmic microscope to look into each of our lives to see what cause and effect produce the present. But it's things that we made happen for the most part, consciously, unconsciously, so that there's a kind of almost moral and causal relativity. So that's what the fate is in the film. I mean, it was just something you had to figure out. So that Neil, precisely because he is very dogmatic in his approach, if he deviates from that rigid idea of here's how I must be, then perforce things will go wrong. Okay, he can't suddenly go get all spontaneous. It's all of a sudden there's no rudder on that boat, and then he's subject and vulnerable to being swept by emotions, like the idea to go back after Waingro, which he shouldn't have done, which Neil McCauley in the beginning of the film never in a million years would have done. But because he elected to be spontaneous in his emotional commitment to Edie, it undid all of them. Whereas Krisha Hurlis, who has no form and is formless, is completely adaptable. and he survives, and then we'll call it can't survive. So what each character, who and what each character is and sets up for himself, determines what happens to him. And so the conceit of the film is that the laws of cause and effect, what will befall you, is a function of how you think about the life you're in.
We want to hurt no one. We're here for the bank's money, not your money. Your money is insured by the federal government. You're not going to lose a dime. Think of your families. Don't risk your life.
You know, in my opinion, every film speaks a different language. The film speaks, it's as if one movie speaks Spanish, another movie speaks German, another one Italian, another one English. And the key is to find, before you start the movie, what kind of language this film is going to speak.
This is based on observations. This is based on people I've met, people I've known, people I've sat with and talked to. Thieves, cops, killers in certain respects. So it's based on content. It's not based, and it's not derived from other cinema. It's based on some, basic research and stuff.
For the research that he wanted on the convicts, he never said, hold back, don't do this, don't do that. It was always go as far as you can go. Talk to the most extreme people you can talk to, as many as you can, get as much information as you can.
They hired me as a technical consultant. They gave me some stuff, but really they gave one of my books, Be So Fierce, to all the bad guys, the De Niro mob, and had them read it because it tells it like it is.
We visited a lot of guys in prison. We went to Folsom and met guys who did this type of thing. One of them had a lot of money and got caught robbing a bank. And I said, why did you continue to do it at a certain point? I mean, risk versus reward again. And he said, it was my job. It's what I knew how to do. I robbed banks.
I spent some time with a lot of women who were involved with men who were in prison, and they were fascinating, some really sad stories involved with a man who was already in prison or who went to prison while they were, and just getting that whole dynamic as understood as I could.
We sat around and listened to cops talk, and I realized quite early that women were not that important, I felt pretty much second class. I made dinner for us 4 hours ago. Every time I try to maintain a consistent mood between us, you withdraw.
I got 3 dead bodies on a sidewalk off Venice Boulevard, Justine. I'm sorry if the goddamn chicken got overcooked.
In preparation for Heat, I used to go out with Tom Alfmont, who was a commander in LAPD at the time, and we would just routinely answer radio calls. Whenever there was something going on, we'd go there, whether there's a homicide, an armed robbery in progress, whatever was happening. And it took us all over the city. And that's how I really learned all about LA.
I mean, he got to the point where sometimes on a couple things calls we went on, I mean, I always had 2 guns, so sometimes I would hand him a gun because he almost became like a partner.
It was pointed out to me, it made total sense, and that is the police is not the Army. The police are used to having overwhelming force. They're not assaulted by an equally well-armed, well-trained force. And so when you assault the police are not used to that. Also, when you're in a situation that Neil McCauley finds himself in, time is against you. You have to get out, and you have to get out fast. Because every 10 seconds that you're staying there, more and more assets are coming in. So they have to shoot their way out, they assault the ambush, they shoot their way out, and they get out fast. That's the objective.
Michael used to like to stage things so that his actors could see what it was really like. Michael staged some interrogation scenes that John Santucci and I did for them.
Michael goes to the extent that most directors won't go to. For example, there's a restaurant I will not name, but on a certain night of the week, the police detectives would meet in the wine room at this restaurant. On a separate night of the week, the mob families would meet in the very same wine room, and Michael would stick the bad guys in there on the night that the mob families, crime families were in there, and they would have dinner together, and we would have dinner, the cops, with the detectives in the very same wine room.
The thing that happens with certain directors that you really are, at the top of their game is you feel this confidence. And you feel as though you can go in there and they'll take care of the situation. They'll take care of you, and they'll take care of the authenticity. They will try to go after the best you have in you.
I wanted everybody really well-trained so that they felt that they could actually do what the characters in this film do, because actors responded in a very big way. Mick Gould and Andy McNabb designed the curriculum by which Val Kilmer and Bobby De Niro and Tom Sizemore would acquire the skills that they had to acquire, and then it was a different curriculum for the cops.
The preparation for the bank heist was in two parts. Obviously, there was the getting into the bank and creating the robbery, and secondly was the gunfight outside.
We cased the entire joint. I went up and got a loan application, just the way they would figure out what's going on in this bank. It was a trip, how much knowledge we got, and they didn't know what was going on.
They were in disguise, obviously, because they're actors. Everybody would know them otherwise. They went in, carried out their task, got in the vehicles, and we drove off. And when we got the tapes back from the bank, no one had been seen. So from the actor's point of view, they know that when they were going to do it on the film, they've already done it in real time, so they felt a bit more comfortable with what they were doing.
Everybody took this movie really seriously. And then when we were, in the planning stages of robberies and stuff, you really got that feeling, this is the way it is. This is how you do it.
Some of the actors thought they knew how to handle weapons, and they were, disabused of that notion. I mean, it was one whole day of safety before anyone was allowed to even fire a round.
We took each individual actor and trained him how to use the weapons. When we were on the ranges, we had actually cops teaching cops. So it kind of divorced everybody. So the bad guys were bad and the good guys were good, and they had the correct training.
I've never experienced anything like this. He had us out on the range to learn how to shoot guns. I've done it before. You practice, you learn, people teach you how to do it, where it goes and stuff. Only I've never done it with real bullets.
Actually, I heard something that was very flattering, that there's a shot where I run out of bullets and I change the mag and I go back to firing. I think it's the Marines. They show the clip telling those maggots, if you can't change your clip as fast as this actor, then get out of my army.
Everything you see on the film was done live on the ranges in Orange County, on the police ranges. It was basically 3 months of training, slowly building up, so there'll be 3 or 4 of them on the range, actually firing really close up, moving around, and hitting targets as well.
I was able to build the actual street to scale. We're using flats on the sheriff's ranges and train the guys to actually do everything they do, moving from station to station.
We shot all that live on the range before we actually did it with blanks downtown. So we did it for real and then went downtown and pretended.
Pretty much everything that we do in the story, short of actual murder, we did off camera.
Val and I knew each other a little bit, but in these training exercises, everything, we got to know each other, and it's kind of has a lot of levels when you do this. You get to know the person, you get to get a sense of who they are, and so that you're communicating and creating a relationship, which you can use, a familiarity that you can use when you're doing the scenes together.
The other advantage is that there could be a look on Tom Sizemore's face in the scene in Johnny's coffee shop when Neil has just bounced Waingro's head on the table, and this guy in the next booth looks over there, and Sizemore looks at him, and there's no expression on his face. It's just lethal, and it's dead cold. And that's because Tom knew that Tom could do what Tom learned how to do. And so it's an authority that manifests itself in dialogue scenes that have nothing to do with weapons.
What do you mean, forget the money?
What am I doing? I'm talking to an empty telephone.
I don't understand.
Because there was a dead man on the other end of this fucking line.
Michael took a group of us on a never-ending helicopter flight over the city. It's also a way that Michael Mann has to explain a movie to his collaborators, which is not about details. He starts with the broad concept. So the fact that we flew over the city for 3 endless hours, just looking for a possible location for the movie gave me a vision of where we were going to set our story.
The thing that I remember the most vividly was that he was interested in portraying Los Angeles in a completely different way than we had ever seen it before, and that it was to be an intricate part of the story in terms of all of the bits and pieces of places and spaces that the different characters of this movie occupied, and how they all fit together to be a portrait of Los Angeles that is one that we were not familiar with.
One side of the story is the city, Los Angeles, and the other side is the conflict, or relationship between Macaulay and Hannah. It looks in a way like one story explains the other, and the two stories really run parallel. And maybe Michael Mann's idea to choose these two characters to explain Los Angeles, and vice versa.
We would go around the city and shoot photographs of things, not necessarily a location, but it could be a crucifix, it could be an old weird restaurant, it could be, but something that had a piece or an idea that might contribute to each of the scenes.
And most of the time there's a huge room with a number of photographs. Some of them belong to the scouting of the movie, so they are very specific shots to describe a scene. Some others are just a collection of images.
And all around us on the walls, Dante and Michael had put inspiration, visual inspirations, and they were just incredible pieces of still photography that they were using both for composition and for color. And I could see already that the palette was cool. It was very blue and very gray.
There's this moment in Macaulay's life in which, he walks in his house, he drops his gun on a glass table, and is entirely alone. Then he stands by the window and you see the ocean, the flat ocean outside, and it's night. We had to gel all the windows in a very selected color. It was not too colorful, not too, we had an amount of green, an amount of blue. The combination of this worked fine with that particular moment. Inside, Dean Macaulay said there's an emotional, lonely factor.
There were something like 106 locations and sets, so it was quite a lot. Even though there was a style to the movie, each of these places was extremely real and believable and contributed to each of the characters in terms of telling us who they were. You wouldn't be fascinated with the characters if it was all about making it stylish. It's all about reinforcing those characters and putting them in a world that they can exist in.
We found a place where there was a legal cockfighting area that was then changed for the movie into a pit bull fight where you find a chop shop. And those are real environments. I mean, Michael is a director who wants to take from the reality and bring that into his film rather than do something that is imaginary. When we were shooting the sequence that involved the robbery of the armored truck and then the aftermath with the death, I mean, the people who were actually there, extras on the set, were true detectives, were true investigative forensic technicians. So you're dealing with people who really know how to do their job, and that brings a level of reality to a scene that otherwise you wouldn't get.
The experience of being on that set for any director, any actor, was electric. And so there's a very collegial atmosphere among the actors and myself. It was almost like a repertory company.
Okay, we're gonna have to take them in the car. Wait till they are all in. Get clean shots. Watch your background.
The main heist and the shootout were a big challenge. We were only allowed to shoot on Saturdays and Sundays. Every weekend we'd have to pull in there, get everything set up, and then pull out of that sequence on Sunday. So you're breaking it up over a series of weekends, which I think is always challenging because you have to come back and now recreate what you were doing a week ago.
The gunfire downtown was truly horrifying sounding. And because of the skyscrapers everywhere, it was just deafening, and it would hang in the sky for maybe like 8 or 10 seconds.
We used 800 to 1,000 rounds per take when we had the cops and our criminals going at each other. I mean, it was quite an amazing sound.
In what we do, we replace everything. In movies, every sound you hear is there for a reason.
So we were mixing in 3 stages simultaneously. And the pre-dubs of all the effects for that reel with all the gunshots came to the stage, and Michael said, "That's not the gunshot."
And everybody was in shock. He said, "How can you not, what don't you like about it?" And I knew what he didn't like about it because I was on location, was that it was horrifying sounding. So the big gun shootout that you hear in the movie is all production sound.
Nothing artificial or could come close to delivering the fear of the sound that the full load made moving through those automatic weapons, and the way the sound ricocheted off the walls of the buildings of an empty downtown. You couldn't manufacture the original sound. It was quite extraordinary. After I shot the film, there was a desire to release it early because it was an accelerated post. The editing was really important, and I worked with one of my most important artistic collaborators, and Dov Honig, my editor. And that's a very important relationship. This is pre-digital editing, so we had an army of people. And it was a 24/7 operation. People were coming in on various different shifts, and it was wild. It was a very intense community and kind of really a shared experience with all those people who were working at the same time. You really do get the sense that we were in the trenches together.
You can't separate the images from the sounds in Michael's movies, and you can't think of the bank heist in Heat without hearing that incredible percussive piece. He has a really very, very open mind as far as music goes. He's a real sonic explorer when it comes to that.
The score was so modern, so interesting. It was such a brave, artistic score.
The thing that came from the first meeting that I thought was an important component to the whole process was I said, Michael, I think the thing that I want to do is have a budget to create a series of experiments. And experiments that were impressions of the film, but weren't exact cues. So what I did was experiment with percussion, experiment with guitar textures, with homemade instruments, with steel cello and strange combinations of sounds and sonorities. So then when it came to the point of actually composing for the movie, I had all of these sound experiments that I was able to share with Michael, and we were able to have something tactile in which to talk about.
Doing Heat was very different because when I was in a different world, and I was in many different worlds, I wanted something that would appear to be eclectic.
Michael Mann brought up Glenn Branca, and Glenn is a composer that uses wonderful, sort of, he may have like 15, 20 guitars on stage playing detuned, sort of rhythmic strumming that after a while turns into these wonderful sort of ghost-like melodies that don't really exist, but they're there. But the idea of using multiple amounts of guitars, a guitar orchestra, was a very, very compelling idea.
There's a long tradition, and there's great precedent for Michael Mann using quite obscure avant-garde music in a lot of his movies and TV shows. I mean, the music is almost as much of a character as some of the actors.
Beatty! Beatty!
There are only 2 parts in Heat where Al Pacino and Robert De Niro meet up, and both times they use my music as the background. The first time they use a cover of a Joy Division song, Do Dawn Fades, that I did. And then the ending, that's when God Moving Over the Face of the Waters comes in. And they worked so well. On the surface of it, they shouldn't have worked. They weren't conventional choices, musically speaking, but they ended up reinforcing the narrative in such a strong way.
The end just kills me. Like it's like that's the love story, right? It's like the only one that could really understand Al's character, Bob's character, and that it's finding the poetry in that and not kind of stopping at the image. It's like, well, what is actually under Chino's need to chase this guy? Well, it's like, it's his twin. That's what he could have been, or whatever, however you want to say it, but it's like the longing is so deep.
The thing about Neil and Hannah, which is similar, is that both men are very individualized. Each is the author of who he is. and they're both fully conscious, and they're both fully aware. Consciousness like that and awareness like that is not easy to come by.
He likes that relationship between this good guy and this bad guy, and the common ground that often happens. I mean, what separates the good from the bad sometimes, you know, is a very, very thin line. He likes you to think, you know, maybe the good guy is really not the good guy after all, and the bad guy is not so bad.
I think it's just great filmmaking. It's a story, it grabs your attention from the beginning, and it doesn't let you go.
Actually, one of the reviews I read said, all things old are made new again. It's cops and robbers, which I had never thought of the movie that way ever, because it's so much about relationships, and it's so specific to a time and place. It's like all good movies, it transcends being pigeonholed.
The performances in the motion picture have lasting power forever. Bar none. I mean, it's an actor's film.
Strangely enough, I thought for De Niro, it was a major moment. It was a quiet look at a thief who has a certain kind of lonely disregard for who he kills, but yet somehow you're in touch with his humanity. It was amazingly complex and simple at the same time.
As brilliant as I thought Bobby was, and as brilliant an actor as he is, that over the years, you know, I've appreciated for some reason more and more, you know, what he did, the precision of his internal orientation. He is so perfectly in the moment without anything artificial. There's such a high level of integrity that you'll see reflected in it, his attitude and just the way his hand moves. You know, it's just a marvelous piece of work by him.
I think what is extraordinary about the film that it is in many ways a classic Western, because the movie opens with an armored truck that's not that different from a stagecoach. And instead of Monument Valley, you are downtown Los Angeles in the canyons of a modern metropolis. And that's what's unique about it. And I think that's what people recognize, and they may not be able to specifically point to it, but it is a resonance that you find, that it's a true American art of storytelling.
Oh, I thought it was an excellent film. I thought that Michael Mann just brought it out and served it to you as an audience and kept you interested in which is basically a very simple story, but gave it an identity and a point of view, which was Michael Mann point of view, and it never wavered.
I was very ambitious about the film and its layers, its significance, what I thought about the film thematically, how it perceived the existence of these individual people, how individualized I would try to make them. And I thought it was a really good idea to make a motion picture that had a lot of people in it, and you get a sense of each person's life. Well, you know, what you walk away from is your connection to the people that you work with and the times you shared, and that was quite extraordinary.
You know, it's like you said. All I am is what I'm going after.
Michael is the type of director that you meet with. He was very specific on this film that he wanted it to be a certain look. Each character had an architectural style, and then also wanted it to be locations that you'd never photographed in Los Angeles before?
When Michael contacted me on this project, and he said to me, I want you to rethink about Los Angeles. I want you to discover like you've never seen it before. Look at it like you've never seen it before. So I started going around at night, find different areas, taking pictures, showing different flavors. Take a look at this. Shoot this now. Shoot this. The beauty of Los Angeles.
This is the freeway scene that actually leads up to where Pacino pulls De Niro over for the first time. What's great about Michael is that he allows you to go off on your own and trusts you that you spend a week or so just going and getting him choices. Come back and you have a meeting with him, usually once or twice a week with Guzmano, the production designer, and you go through all of the folders. And what's great about Michael is that he comments on each folder. So he'll write on it that it was good, bad, NG, warm, and you then sort of keep them in piles, because what he'll do is a lot of times 6 months down the road, he'll say, well, remember that place that I saw? His mind is impeccable.
Like a week prior to this with Michael, I came over here and photographed the area. So when he got here and he saw this yellow sulfur, he was all excited. So this is the world, you know, like you see that yellow mountain of sulfur over there? See, this is the world of Dogtown. See, it was all in here, all this area here. Now they're close to the traffic. Before you could go through here with the car. Driving in the middle of the tracks, there was a pergola with grapes. And there was Mexican guys sitting there smoking cigarettes, playing domino. There were shags after shags, a little community of people living inside of this little cardboard boxes. There was cockfights, there was dogfight, and way on the other side it was this huge goat farm. And in the middle of this, there was a freight train at 5 o'clock in the afternoon that he will go through all this incredible civilization, and there will be people coming in and out of the train, like jumping off, getting to the train, going somewhere. It's like the best corrosive architecture of Los Angeles. It was here.
And to give you a little idea of where my estimates come from, this is a printout.
Nobody knew the merch was yours.
The scene was done here.
The scene was done there. You had the computers and stuff out here. That was a carport there with a sliding glass door.
Right.
Right.
Since then, the room's been closed in.
You had some satellite dishes here as well, or?
You had
a little
we put
piece.
another 60-foot tower right here.
That's right.
60-foot tower. You guys wanted us to take down the guide wires, and I said there's no way I can put a 60-foot tower up there, because I said the wind blows up here something fierce, and if that thing bends over, it'll come all the way down.
Exactly,
So.
and that's right. And we actually filmed from the driveway because you could see the freeway and the mountains. What an amazing spot.
Look at the way this house is built. You know, it's like toothpicks holding the structure. Something very special, you know, for Danny Trejo character. It was perfect, this house. I love this, the altitude. You know, there was something very peculiar about this house and Stilt. And this whole area, this is like, you know, it's like the heart of East LA. There's only 3 or 4 hills, you know, and beautiful. Look at that downtown view. Looking west. It's beautiful. Incredible.
Well, basically, when we moved in here, we knew this was the Heat house, and this was the room where the guy in the crew got shot, and he released who ratted him out. So we pulled up the carpet, and to our surprise, right here on this spot was the actual blood stain from the scene. A little piece of history of Heat right there under the floorboards.
You know, I chased down some cruise guys just looking to fuck up, get busted back. That you?
You must have worked some dipshit cruise.
I worked all kinds.
This is it. This is the table. This is the power table. This is where everybody wants to come in this restaurant.
Since this was, to Michael, a very important moment, he actually wanted us to keep looking and looking and looking. And in fact, it was probably 2 days before we were actually scheduled to film here. Michael still hadn't chosen which location he wanted to shoot. And in fact, remember, Guzmano, the other choice, which what you came up with, was the little taco stand.
The little stand by the side of the freeway. With the flames coming out of that. Yeah.
So Michael went back and forth actually on either going to the taco stand or shooting here.
I thought, they're driving at night in the freeway.
Yeah.
A little side, they got off the freeway, so let's have a bite to eat.
So there was a rumor that they were here at separate times. And I think that more than I direct people to the bathroom here, or have to say we don't take reservations for anything under 6, I have to tell people, no, they were here at the same time. They were together.
It's a fact. It's a definite fact that the two of them were in that scene.
But not only that, but also what that photograph there tells you.
There you go.
There we go.
This architectural style and the glass and the opening matched very well to the bank that we ended up filming, which is Far East Bank that's at another location. But it all worked quite well in matching that this would be the exterior, and you could believe that the inside was a bank. The guys come out with suitcases full of millions of dollars. They come across the courtyard here, and as you can see in the scene, and this is where, running down, this is where they proceed to start doing the whole chase sequence. What they ended up doing is all of these bus stops, the side of the Bonaventure Hotel, all had, was all squibbed. Special effects put up pre-squibbed walls so that whenever it looked as if they were shooting, all the little squibs would hit on the side of the building. And it continued running all the way up to right where Figueroa is.
We shot thousands and thousands of rounds, and there were tourists watching the incredible shootout, going to the street, picking up this shell as a souvenir. I remember that tourists from Japan, from Europe, watching mesmerized this incredible Hollywood production. And going for the shell, the empty shell on the sidewalk.
Now, one of the things that was amazing was that we actually fell behind a weekend, and it fell on Mother's Day. And this restaurant, Cafe Pinot, which had just opened up, had pre-reserved the whole restaurant for a Mother's Day buffet. So all of these mothers are supposedly having this beautiful lunch and had to watch a gunfight. It was actually quite extraordinary. They ended up having a lot of fun, and it was a bonus that I don't think anyone ever anticipated, that eating their brunch out the window is Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. But this is where it all kind of culminated in the thing.
Michael had this big table set up with the map put downtown. We had cars, miniature cars, everything set up. It was like planes for World War III.
And we actually filmed it from 4th Street. First of all, he came through that little cafeteria area. Right. Then he came through the fountain, and then he ended up over there on 4th Street. So Tom Sizemore ends up getting killed here. I mean, we shot scenes over here, but we actually ended up having some cameras here, because this is the area that he died in. This is where we ended up doing the ending scene of the film, where it took us months and months of actually organizing it with LAX.
Right.
But what Michael found interesting here was, and because it was at night, was the lineup of all of the lights that actually in the radar system that guides the planes in and being underneath the flight path. So the first night actually at LAX was on the runway scene where De Niro comes out of, I think it's the Delta
right, and he
terminal, starts running across. We had to shoot that after midnight because that portion of the runway, I think it's 1,000 feet, it's an extension to the runway where they land 747s. And I think after midnight, there was a short window where we could use that portion of the runway. So we had a real 747, it was a Delta airplane,
Right.
and De Niro actually ran in front of the plane.
For about maybe 3 weeks, every day,
Yeah.
Michael Mann will send me to here with the art department and measuring stakes to position in those boxes.
It was every day. It was
Every day.
different. It was an inch here,
An inch
there.
here, an inch this way, 2 inches this way, to photograph the installation with those boxes. It was an
To
amazing
get it
thing.
exactly perfect for Michael and to logistically set it up for the action with De Niro and Pacino at the end.
Right. So I think the logistic and the geography of, take place in the story, and also the beauty of this location, which is, just think about it, two people running for their life under this jets landing and taking off, and the sound, and all that it kind of surreal, and the end of it's like it coming to at the end of the road.
What we accomplished on Heat could never be accomplished nowadays. And in fact, LAX's filming policy is guerrilla style, news style, 20 people only. Our access to the control tower, our access to this area right here would be completely against FAA regulations now and off limits, absolutely off limits. So I think that Heat probably will be the last film to ever shoot that kind of scope at probably
in
any airport in the world.